Legally, the island of Bali is part of the Muslim state of Indonesia. In fact, Bali is a popular resort all over the world with its own customs and rules that have practically nothing in common with the rest of Indonesia. Expensive European-looking shopping centers with all sorts of world brands share one street with tents with an incomprehensible soup for $50. The streets are clogged with traffic jams with chaotically moving cars and scooters, and the locals, on the one hand, are very welcoming and friendly, and on the other hand, they take great pleasure to deceive an inattentive foreigner in a street currency exchange. And yes, in addition to the ocean, surfers and palm trees with bananas and coconuts, there are also video games. Moreover, just as Bali differs from the rest of Indonesia, local video gaming establishments differ from most of the same establishments in the rest of the world. Shops with modern consoles and arcade halls coexist here with market-looking stalls with pirated goods in bags and scary-looking for the 21st century console clubs where local barefoot children play on an hourly fee. In general, there is a lot to see here. Just take a look at the Cafe I'm in now. By the way, has anyone seen Victor Sullivan? He's somehow late. My Russian chasing game series has always been not only about geek stuff, but also about the places in which this geek stuff is sold. And I always try to dilute the nerdy theme with interesting facts about the country about which I am filming an episode. And today there will be perhaps even a little more such everyday topics. But I hope that this will only make your viewing more interesting, because I don't know about you, but I always want to know not only where and for how much you can buy fresh Pokemon game or a cool retro game, but also how things are going, for example, with what to eat on the way to the game store, or how to even get to it in a country with virtually no public transport. Therefore, once again, it is with great pleasure that I tell you. Hello YouTube, my name is Victor. We are on the island of Bali, and today I invite you to an almost Nathan Drake adventure, albeit without visits to prehistoric temples with collapsing floors and a lot of traps. But I hope it will be just as interesting and beautiful. Looks like we won't get Sally, so let's go without him. I want to start the story about Bali by busting two of the most popular myths. Fabulous Bali, heaven on earth, and a very expensive paradise. Both are not true. Yes, the weather here is really fabulous, about 84.2 degrees all year round, but with everything else, there are no less difficulties and nuances in Bali than in any other place in the world. And it's really expensive just to fly here. A one-way ticket from Europe will cost about $1,000. In all other respects, you can live and eat really cheap in Bali if you are not one of those who pay $500 a day in a fashionable hotel room overlooking the ocean. Of course, there are some of these here too. You can rent a decent, modest apartment here from about $400 a month, and food in many cafes is cheaper than anywhere in Russia, USA, or Europe. For example, I really liked a place called 25 PM. It's kind of like a coffee shop, but in addition to drinks and desserts, they also serve very tasty food. For example, a bowl with teriyaki rice and beef costs $1.50. Pies with vegetables, really great ones, served with 2 sauces, regular and spicy, $1. Well, of course, coffee, which is prepared in a bunch of different ways, is also available. The one dripping into my glass now costs 50 cents. Naturally, there are also more than enough overpriced establishments in Bali, but we're not talking about them now, are we? If you open Google Maps and type in the request for video game stores, the screen will be covered with a considerable number of red dots, and I visited almost every one of them. As you already understood from the introduction, there are both modern places that are quite familiar to us, which however, do not always look neat. Well, these are quite nuances. And as if preserved from the 90s, in which, however, sometimes you can find much more interesting stuff at good prices. Naturally, today we will look at both, I suggest making our first stop at the Start Game Store, which proudly calls itself the oldest video game store in Bali. The vibes inside are quite cool, but it looks not like a store, but like some kind of time-worn warehouse. But modern and slightly retro games, as well as random faded figurines, and this cute pal are available here. And this mess actually very well demonstrates the attitude of the locals towards everything around them. They don't give a damn about anything. The guys here are constantly chilling, they're not in a hurry, and don't understand why they're fussing at all. Chill out, dude, it's warm and beautiful. Why be bothered with anything at all? Don't get me wrong, the seller and also the owner of this store was very friendly. We had a pleasant chat. He told me that he himself loves video games and plays them. The price tag for modern games was quite good and significantly lower than it is now in Russia. For example, new games for the Switch here cost about 40–45 bucks. But it was with games on the Switch that I had a funny story. A friend asked me to buy him Pokemon Violet, and I asked the owner of the Start Game Store if he had it. At the moment, Violet was out of stock. It was all sold out. But he said that he will have restock next week. He was just planning to order the missing items. This is what we agreed on. During the conversation, I also asked if he had any retro stuff because I might be interested in it. In the store, I only noticed a few GBA cartridges and a pack of Wii bootleg games that had long been covered in dust. And, as it turned out, he had retro stuff at home. We exchanged phone numbers and he promised to send me photos of the retro stuff that he has for sale in the evening, and also to let me know when the Pokemon arrives. What do you think? Did I receive a message from him? Well, yes, but not the one I've expected. That evening I received a message. Hello, what do you need? At first, I thought that he was just interested in specifics. Well, I asked him for a retro, so maybe he's interested in what I needed exactly, but somewhere in the subconscious I realized that this was not entirely about that. And, as it turned out, I was right. The dude simply forgot who I am and what I need. Apparently, he was not very interested in selling something to someone. I think it has already become clear that these were the first and last messages from him, and he did not send me anything. Just like he didn't let me know Pokemon was in stock later. So a week later, I just bought it in another store. This is roughly how all communication with locals in Bali goes. They don't give a damn about anything. This chill applies to absolutely anything. If you expect to be served quickly in a cafe, or that someone will care that there is already a line of a dozen people at the checkout at the grocery store and you should somehow let them go more quickly, forget it. In Bali, no one is ever in a hurry. Well, perhaps, except for tourists who can rush as much as they want, but yet nothing will happen faster. Even the traffic here, despite the apparent chaos and danger, is completely chilly. The tourist part of Bali is one continuous huge traffic jam in which the island crawls from morning to evening, and especially its automobile part. Tired of traffic traveling by taxi, I finally rented a scooter to make the journey at least a little faster. On the road here, no one freaks out, no one cut anyone off or yell obscenities at anyone, or don't do any other unpleasant things any metropolitan driver familiar to. You need to barely drive at a speed of 10 miles per hour, so just relax and have fun, friend. At the same time, yes, scooters bypass these traffic jams on small pedestrian paths, or crossing solid ones in the oncoming traffic, and no one, not even the police, cares about this. They're careful, they look around, they don't crush pedestrians. So why bother them, right? The only people who make the fuss here are the local moto taxis, who constantly honk their horns if you're walking in the hope of ripping off some easy money from an untanned tourist who hasn't yet settled in. Don't ever get on one of these if you're planning to come to Bali. They will easily charge you 100,000 Indonesian rupees for a trip, which will actually cost 15,000 if you order a taxi through a local Uber, Gojek. Well, since I started talking about scams, never use currency exchange booths in the street with a rate that sometimes seems too good, because they will also try to deceive you. Start talking, fussing about counting money, and at the moment when you turn away, they will give you only part of the rupees that were just counted in front of you. Unknowingly, I was overcharged for 30 bucks. I sort of counted the money, turned away for a second, and at that moment, the stack of 1.5 million rupees lying on the table turned into 1 million in a split second. And I found out about this only a few hours later, when for some reason I didn't have enough cash to pay at the store, although I was sure that there should be enough. In general, the stratification of society here is quite serious, and it is clear that people doing the kind of things I described above are far from having a good life. But this can easily spoil the impression of being in, as they say, Paradise Bali. At the same time, these streets of the third world with money changer scammers are placed here side by side with modern European malls with stores of expensive brands, restaurants, and of course, geek goods and even arcades. Let's take a look at the local time zone, but of course the chances of finding something interesting for retro-loving person like you and me are close to zero. Tourism and the Europeanization of Bali began to develop towards the end of the 1970s, and hardly anyone brought arcade machines here. At best, we can only find something from the late 90s here, but this hall immediately shows that it, like modern arcade halls in Russia, is mostly designed for little children. And the arcades here will be the most simple ones, like just poke the screen to get tickets. There are some others too, though they are mostly modern. For example, Japanese rhythm games. On the other hand, in an era when everyone has a computer or console at home, arcade halls are no longer interesting to anyone, and people go there mainly just for all sorts of dance revolutions, for which they need too much space to have one in their own apartment. The proximity of Japan could not help but play a role, and there are even grabbers with real large anime figures, just like the ones that stand in the arcades in Japan itself. In addition, expect air hockey, VR entertainment, several light gun shooters, and racing. Those who are particularly nostalgic can still sometimes find several homemade arcade emulators in cafes. For example, there are 2 of these in the Mad Ronin ramen shop. Naturally, they are of no historical interest, but they are quite suitable for having fun while you wait for your order. In general, Balinese love video games. And if the emulators in the ramen shop could only be installed for the entertainment of tourists, then the abundance of local shops and console repairs is definitely designed specifically for local residents. Well, at least for some of them. The very first video game store that I came across in Bali looked like this. A bunch of boxes with PS3 and PS4 on the shelves, and bags with bootleg games for PlayStation 2. A TV with the custom firmware patching PlayStation is hanging on the wall, and the price list is printed in large letters on the signs at the entrance. Terima Easy Game means downloading games. 25,000 Indonesian rupees is approximately $1. The prices for the service you can figure out yourself. A showcase with original games is also present, but in this particular store, bootlegs are obviously sold better. We will return to the bootlegs later. But before that, I want to check out the prices for the original games. In this store, I bought a latest for the time I was in Bali, FIFA 2023. The game cost 40 bucks. The CDs here are mainly brought from Hong Kong or Singapore. English is available in all the games. Almost everyone here speaks English at least a little, which means they don't want Japanese games. It is interesting that Sony has a representative office in Indonesia. If, for example, you look at the PS5 gamepads sold here, they have a Sony Indonesia holographic sticker on them, but it seems that it is more profitable for sellers to purchase games unofficially. And also, among everything that is sold in this store, my eye caught this. After weighing the pros and cons, I immediately purchased this box. The console was checked to be working, but it was clarified that there was no warranty for it. It works now. If anything happens, we don't care, they told me. I think that many have already guessed what kind of PS2 this is, and yes, this is the so-called local refurbish. They buy old consoles from the NTSC-J region, supply new Chinese cables and gamepads, print new boxes in the best traditions of Russia in the 90s, and sell them as new. As I said above, there are enough poor people in Bali, and for some of them, buying a child even at least a PS2 is more than a good gift. So such magical new consoles are really in demand here, and of course, consoles are also modded, and games for them are still printed and sold in those same bags on the walls of the store. There are both the most common games and brand new hacked games. One such disc costs 7,000 rupees, that is approximately 30 cents. The most interesting thing is that these are not CDR, but factory-pressed DVDs. We thought that in 2024 this would no longer happen. Even in Russian stores you can hardly find bootleg PS2 games. But in Bali, there is more than enough of it. How do you like Super Mario Bros. For PlayStation 2 or Angry Birds, though they were at least 5 years late with this release? On the other hand, we don't know how many years ago they started selling the main mobile hit for the second PlayStation. Or maybe you want Gran Turismo 5 for PS2? Well, they've got it too. In the process of searching for video game stores, I went into both bookstores and souvenir shops. By the way, check out the parking lot of the local mall. Firstly, the most interesting thing is there are much more books in English here than in Indonesian. And at some point, I even thought that it was impossible to find books in Indonesian in Bali. It's not that I directly need them, but you must admit that the fact that they are not there is at least strange. But eventually, I found a store called Gramedia, which sells books exclusively in Indonesian, and prices are much cheaper than for books in English. In Indonesia, by the way, it turns out a lot of manga is published. One volume costs from $2 to $3 US. For comparison, for publications in English here, they charge from $6 to $10. Let's also check out a toy store here. From here, I really wanted to take away several sets of the Japanese equivalent of Lego. I didn't even know that there were official construction kits based on the anime. When I visited Japan a few years ago, I didn't see these. And here you have Pokemon, Detective Conan, Doraemon, and even Naruto. It looks very good, but it also costs a lot. For this Naruto one, for example, they ask for $140. Anime is also extremely popular here. Even in ordinary grocery stores you can find stuff like this. Inside are some chocolate sticks and a random toy. I've got the coolest one. Doraemon is such a cute character. Well, I just can't help but show you the weirdest part of the souvenir department. I don't know who thought it was a good idea to do this, but here you are, ladies and gentlemen, check out the Indonesian superheroes. And yes, Homer Simpson is also a superhero here, perhaps even the most important one. For cat lovers, there is a light version, but you must admit it's not even close to the hilarious previous ones. But I must note that modern malls in Bali are still a smaller part of the retail space, clearly imported by Europeans and Australians in the last 10 years. Basically, trade here is organized on a market principle. These are a bunch of stalls along the streets. These are mobile vans with dubious-looking snacks, for which local residents often line up. These are rails with clothes in the 80s-style street markets right next to the roadway. This also applies to video game stores. By the way, if anyone is wondering how things are with computers in Bali, we don't all have consoles, right? I'm reporting. It is very extensive and approximately in the same form as we had in Russia at the beginning of the 2000s. A bunch of both individual and gathered traders under one roof trying to max out their prices for a stupid foreigner for some useless low-quality Chinese junk. I tried to buy a USB 3.1 Rev 2 cable here and couldn't do it. Everywhere there is stupidly cheap Chinese crap for the price of an airplane. The computers themselves, however, mostly laptops, are available in large quantities in stores and at good prices. I wanted to find some old hardware for retro computers. I didn't find anything. Maybe I just need to know where to look. Google didn't help me with this issue. But I came across old stuff for consoles in one of these local market-type stores, and I was simply blown away by the fact that somewhere in the world there are still specialized places where the owners do not understand what they have on the counter and how much it costs now. Perhaps this is due to the fact that, as the owner of the oldest Start store told me, locals are not at all interested in retro games. For them, all this junk is just junk. They don't bother with any eBay, but do their business on modern consoles and games here and now. Where from such a set of treasures could appear on the shelves in this situation is not entirely clear, but judging by the layer of dust and faded covers, I wouldn't be surprised if it had been lying there, unneeded by anyone, since the times when retro consoles were actual consoles. I must admit that I came across only one place with such a wide assortment of expensive retro. This didn't stop me from buying the Australian Terranigma for SNES, and the American Shining Wisdom for Saturn, by the way. But this also doesn't mean that there are tons of retro stuff lying around in broken down hangars in Bali. On the other hand, considering how many tourists there are, in principle, I'm very surprised that all this remained until 2023. I only paid about $100 for both my purchases. And if you go to eBay, you'll realize that $100 for those two boxes is a steal. Also on the shelves, you can find tons of Chinese junk, such as cases for the Wii and strange things for 2023, such as mod chips for the same PS2, although we have already discussed above that, they are probably in demand here to this day. In other stores in the neighborhood, the assortment is built mainly around CDs for PlayStation 4 and 5 and cartridges for Nintendo Switch. Here and there is a small assortment of leftover discs for PS3 and sometimes Xbox 360, but I couldn't find anything interesting among them. People here, as I understand it, are mostly still trying to play bootleg games, and no one of the authorities really cares about this. Even the signs everywhere say, service and installation of games. But original new games, by the way, appear here quickly for both PS5 and Switch. Maybe not right on the day of release, but the next day or later, everything that was released is already on the shelves. On the other hand, I said above that there is an official Sony representative office in Indonesia, so maybe retail stores are buying hotcakes directly on release day. The price tag, I repeat, is lower than in Russia. New products with our money for both PS5 and Switch cost around 40 to 50 USD per game. Well, finally, let's take a look at the local Craigslist. There are several online resources for selling anything and everything in Bali, but the largest and most popular is called Tokopedia. At first, I even sinfully thought, well, since there are such offers for retro games in retail stores, maybe I can find a bunch of things on Tokopedia too. And, as you understand, it's impossible. Those who use the internet and especially sell something online are aware of world prices, so they sell their stuff even more expensive. It's interesting that despite the proximity of Australia and the Terranigma I bought, buying a PAL SNES here is, to put it mildly, problematic. Yes, you are looking at a strange person who decided why not buy a SNES on the vacation to play a JRPG he found on the original hardware and not an emulator before he will get home. But alas, 99% of offers for Super Nintendo in Indonesia are American. However, many are sold complete with bootleg cartridges. There are not very many original games for SNES in the offers, and the retro section is generally filled with new-made Chinese crap from AliExpress. There are also authentic games for the same Saturn, both Japanese and American, but all of them have long been collected from local sellers by local retro hucksters and are sold in 1 or 2 online stores at prices with a bunch of zeros. Sometimes even more expensive than its current average price on eBay. But sometimes you come across interesting bootlegs. How do you like Sonic 4 for Mega Drive? Yes, I also wanted to have one. This concludes our journey today, my friends. I really hope you liked it. Please let me know in the comments section below if you're interested in these type of videos on the channel. As it is a translation of my earlier episode for my Russian channel, I can make more of these for you if you liked it. These type of episodes can also be released on the channel more often than the ones I make directly for the Russian Video Game Comrade show. So let me know if you want them. Have a nice day. See you soon. Sincerely yours, your Russian Video Game Comrade, Victor. I'm trying to make more videos for the Russian Video Game Comrade show now, guys. If you like the show and want to see new episodes more often, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Let's make it this way. If we achieve only a $101 monthly patronage, I'll promise to release a new episode every month. How does it sound? The link to the Patreon page and to the other social networks are in the description. If you like weird Soviet and Russian stuff, follow me on Twitter. I post it a lot there.